Okay, so let's talk about Cushing's Triad. This is going to be the body's response to increased pressure within the cranium. And it's a triad, so it's three signs and symptoms that we're going to see here. So we start off with increased systolic BP. So what's going on here is we have some sort of insult, right? We have a head trauma, let's say, and this is going to lead to some bleeding in the skull. So this bleeding is now taking up space inside that skull, which is exerting pressure. The skull is a fixed sort of volume place, so there's not anywhere for anything to go. It's going to exert its pressure on the brain. And when this happens, it actually prevents the brain from being able to get blood to it. It's kind of making the pressure inside the skull higher than the body's ability to get blood to the skull, to the brain. So, we're going to increase, the body's going to increase the systolic blood pressure. And this is actually a sympathetic nervous system response. So the sympathetic nervous system increases the systolic blood pressure to get blood up to the brain because there's an increase in pressure. So we get to see that. Now, what's interesting is the rest of the body doesn't have this pressure problem that's going on in the brain, and the rest of the body doesn't understand why there's all these sympathetic nervous system sort of responses like increased blood pressure, increased heart rate. All of these sort of things are going on, and the rest of the body doesn't need it. And so, what's very strange about Cushing's triad is you wind up with this reflexive bradycardia. And this is actually the parasympathetic nervous system reacting to the sympathetic response that we saw earlier. So this bradycardia is related to the increased systolic blood pressure. And again, we don't normally see those two things, bradycardia and higher blood pressure or high systolic blood pressure. So the final piece to this is going to be, and this is why we kind of draw this as a triangle, irregular respirations. The brain has been deprived of oxygen, so the brain is hypoxic, especially the brain stem. So our sort of brain stem right here, which is the thing that's controlling the respiration, brain stem. This is hypoxic, as well as you're eventually, with even more and more pressure, the only sort of place for the pressure and brain tissue to go is sort of downward, because that's the only hole that we have in our cranium, and starts to actually exert itself physically on the brainstem itself. And so you get these irregular respirations due to those sort of structural and chemical problems within the brainstem. And so this is the triad right here: systolic blood pressure increase. The diastolic doesn't, so this is a widening pulse pressure, bradycardia, and irregular respirations. This is the Cushing's triad from increased intracranial pressure.